The cave was a jagged wound in the Afghan hillside, its mouth barely wide enough for a man to slip through. Inside, the air was thick with the musty reek of damp stone and goat dung, pressing against Elias Whitaker's lungs like a wet rag. The 64-year-old mechanic crouched low, his knees aching from the cold seeping through the rock floor. His calloused fingers traced the edge of a rusted wrench in his pocket, a habit from years spent coaxing life from stubborn engines. Outside, the distant crack of gunfire echoed, mingling with the low hum of a Predator drone circling somewhere above the barren valley. The Taliban were close, too close. Their voices, sharp and guttural, carried on the wind, punctuated by the crunch of boots on gravel just beyond the cave's entrance. Eli's group, 4 souls clinging to survival, was a mismatched lot. Private First Class Ryan Delgado, a wiry 22-year-old with a quick tongue and quicker doubts, clutched his M4 rifle, his eyes darting to the cave's mouth. Beside him, Corporal Sarah Tate, a 28-year-old medic with a blood-streaked face, tended to Specialist Malik Jones, whose leg was torn open by shrapnel, his breathing shallow and ragged. The fourth, Noor, a local interpreter in her 30s, sat rigid, her dark eyes wide with fear as she whispered translations of the enemy's chatter. They'd scrambled into this hiding place hours ago, after an ambush shredded their convoy and left their Humvee a smoldering wreck. The cave, half collapsed and barely concealed by thorny scrub, was their last refuge. Eli's heart thudded, not just from the enemy's proximity but from the weight of being dismissed yet again. Back at the outpost, the younger soldiers had called him Pops, their smirks barely hidden when he'd offered to check the Humvee's rattling engine before the mission. "Stick to your wrenches, old man," Delgado had said, waving him off. Now, with the Taliban sweeping the hills, Eli's knowledge of machines and terrain, gleaned from a lifetime of fixing what was broken and navigating Ohio's backroads, felt like their only edge. But the group's eyes were on Delgado's rifle, not Eli's weathered hands. The cave's walls seemed to close in, the air heavy with the sour tang of sweat and blood. Malik's groans cut through the silence, each one a reminder of time slipping away. Tate pressed a bandage to his wound, her hands steady but her lips tight. "He's losing too much blood," she muttered, glancing at Eli as if he might somehow fix a man like he fixed a carburetor. Noor hissed a warning, her voice barely audible. "They're closer. Talking about tracks, our tracks." The words landed like a stone in Eli's gut. The Taliban had found the scuffed dirt leading to the cave. It wouldn't be long before they checked inside. Delgado shifted, his rifle scraping against the rock, the sound jarring in the cramped space. "We should have kept moving," he whispered, his tone sharp with frustration. "This hole's a trap. They'll find us, and we're done." His eyes flicked to Eli, lingering with a mix of scorn and desperation. "Got any bright ideas, Pops? Or you just here to hold our hand?" Eli's jaw tightened, but he kept his voice low and steady, like he was calming a skittish horse back on his family's farm. "Keep your voice down, son. Sound carries in these hills." He nodded toward the cave's mouth, where slivers of sunlight pierced the scrub cover. The enemy's voices were louder now, clipped and urgent, maybe 20 yards away. Eli's mind raced, pulling at memories of his father's stories, how he'd hidden from German patrols in a French barn during World War II, using the land's secrets to survive. These hills weren't so different, rocky, deceptive, full of hidden folds if you knew where to look. Noor's trembling hands clutched a small notebook, her translations scrawled in hasty pencil. "They're calling for more men," she whispered. "They think we're still running, but they'll check here soon." Her voice cracked, and Eli saw the fear in her eyes, the kind he'd seen in his wife's face when their son enlisted years ago. He wanted to tell her it'd be all right, but the weight of their situation crushed such promises. Instead, he focused on the cave itself, its narrow throat, the loose shale underfoot, the faint drip of water from some unseen crack. It was a poor hiding spot, but it had possibilities, levers to pull if he could find them. Tate looked up from Malik, her hands slick with blood. "We need to move him soon, or he won't make it. Can we even get out of here?" Her tone wasn't accusing, but it carried the same doubt Eli had heard for months. An old mechanic, good for fixing trucks, not for war. He swallowed the sting and leaned closer to the cave's mouth, peering through the scrub. The hills were a maze of ochre and shadow, dotted with boulders and dry gullies. He'd spent weeks studying the outpost's maps, memorizing the terrain while the soldiers laughed over their energy drinks. Now, that knowledge was a lifeline. A sudden clatter outside made them freeze. A rock skittered down the hillside, kicked by a careless boot. The enemy was close, maybe 10 yards now. Delgado's knuckles whitened on his rifle, his breath quick and shallow. "We fight or we die," he hissed, but Eli grabbed his arm, firm but not rough. "Wait," he said, his voice low but commanding. "Fighting's no good if they outnumber us 10-1. We need a way out, not a last stand." Delgado yanked his arm free, his eyes blazing. "You got a better idea? What are you gonna do, fix their AKs to jam?" The sarcasm cut, but Eli didn't flinch. He'd heard worse from foremen back in Ohio, back when he was piecing together tractors during the lean years of the 80s. He'd learned then that machines, and men, broke in predictable ways, if you knew their weak points. The Taliban's trucks, old Soviet relics he'd seen rumbling past the outpost, were no different. Overloaded, poorly maintained, their engines coughed like sick mules. If he could get to one. Malik groaned again, louder this time, and Tate clamped a hand over his mouth, her eyes wide with panic. The voices outside stopped, then started again, closer, more deliberate. Nor whispered. They heard him. "They're coming." Eli's mind churned. The cave was a death trap if they stayed, but running blind was suicide. His fingers tightened around the wrench, its weight grounding him. He thought of his father's tales again, how a single well-placed nail in a German truck's tire had stalled a patrol long enough for his squad to slip away. Small moves, big results. Eli crawled to the cave's mouth, careful not to disturb the loose shale. The scrub cover was thin, but it gave him a narrow view of the hillside. 2 Taliban fighters stood 15 yards away, their rifles slung casually as they scanned the ground. Behind them, a battered truck idled, its engine rattling like a bag of bolts. Eli's pulse quickened. That truck was their ticket out, if he could reach it, if he could make it fail on his terms. But the cave's entrance was too exposed, and Malik couldn't walk, let alone run. They needed a distraction, a delay, something to throw the enemy off. He turned back to the group, their faces pale in the dim light. Delgado's scowl hadn't softened, but Tate's eyes held a flicker of hope, and Noor's were locked on him, waiting. Malik's breathing was weaker now, each rasp a countdown. Eli's chest tightened with the weight of their trust, fragile as it was. He wasn't a soldier, but he'd rebuilt engines under worse pressure. Flooded barns, midnight breakdowns, his family's livelihood on the line. This was no different. It was about finding the weak point and turning it. "They're gonna find us," Delgado muttered, his voice barely a whisper. "We're out of time." Eli met his gaze, his own eyes steady. "Then we make time. That truck out there, it's our way out. But we gotta be smart." He didn't have a plan yet, not fully, but the pieces were there. The terrain, the truck's bad engine, his own hands that knew how to break and build. The enemy was closing in, their shadows flickering across the cave's mouth. Eli's mind locked onto a single truth. If they were to survive, it'd be because he proved them wrong, Pops or not. The cave's damp chill seeped into Elias Whitaker's bones, but his mind burned with focus. The Taliban were closing in, their voices sharper now, boots scuffing just beyond the scrub-covered entrance. The air stank of sweat, blood, and the faint diesel tang wafting from the enemy's idling truck outside. Eli's fingers gripped the wrench in his pocket, its familiar weight anchoring him as he pieced together a plan. The group, Delgado, Tate, Noor, and the wounded Malik, watched him, their faces a mix of doubt and desperation. The cave's walls pressed closer, the drip of water from a hidden crack marking time like a metronome. Malik's shallow breaths grew fainter, and the enemy's chatter carried a new urgency. Eli knew they had minutes, maybe less, before the Taliban checked the cave. He crouched near the entrance, peering through the thorny scrub. The truck, a battered Soviet-era GAZ, coughed and rattled, its engine misfiring in a rhythm Eli could read like a book. He'd fixed worse back in Ohio, coaxing life from tractors left to rust. That truck was their way out, if he could cripple it to stall the patrol, then restart it for their escape. The hills, with their hidden gullies and rocky folds, offered a path to a coalition outpost 10 miles west, if they could move unseen. But Malik's wound and the group's skepticism were hurdles as real as the enemy outside. Delgado's voice cut through the gloom, low and biting. "So, what's it gonna be, Pops? You gonna hotwire that truck from here?" His sarcasm masked fear, but it stung all the same. Eli met his gaze, steady as stone. "Not hotwire. Sabotage first, then drive. We make 'em chase their own tail." Delgado snorted, but Tate, pressing a fresh bandage to Malik's leg, looked up with a flicker of hope. "Can you do it? Get to the truck without them seeing?" Eli nodded, his mind mapping the terrain from weeks of studying outpost maps. "There's a gully, runs parallel to the hill. Shallow, but enough cover if I move fast." He pointed to the cave's mouth, where shadows danced from the enemy's movements. "Need a distraction, though. Something to pull 'em away." Nor, clutching her notebook, whispered, "I can mimic their radio chatter. Make them think their scouts found something." Her voice trembled, but her eyes were resolute. Eli gave her a nod, seeing the courage beneath her fear. "Good. That'll buy me time." The plan took shape in hushed fragments. Eli would slip out, using the gully to reach the truck, and sabotage its fuel line to stall the patrol. Then, he'd rig it to start again, barely, for their escape. Nor would fake a radio call, mimicking Taliban slang she'd overheard, to draw the fighters away. Tate would keep Malik stable, while Delgado covered the cave's entrance, ready to shoot if things went south. The risks were brutal. Eli could be spotted, Noor's deception could fail, or Malik could bleed out before they moved. But staying put meant death. Delgado shook his head, his rifle tight in his hands. "You're banking everything on an old man crawling through dirt to mess with a truck? We should fight our way out." His voice was a low growl, but Eli caught the tremor in it. The kid was scared, and scared men made rash calls. Eli leaned closer, his tone calm but firm. "Fighting's a last resort, son. You shoot, they'll swarm us. Let me do what I know." He thought of his father's World War II stories, how a single well-placed wrench had once jammed a German half-track's axle, giving his squad time to slip away. Eli had learned that lesson young. Machines were predictable, men less so. The GAZ outside was a beast he could tame, if he could reach it. But the group's doubt weighed heavy. Tate's hands shook as she tied off Malik's bandage, and Noor's lips moved silently, rehearsing her radio call. Malik, barely conscious, muttered something about home, a farm in Georgia, from the sound of it. Eli's chest tightened. He'd promised his own wife he'd come back from this volunteer stint. He meant to keep that promise. Noor began her deception, cupping her hands to muffle her voice, mimicking a crackly radio transmission. "Base, this is Scout 3. Track spotted, East Ridge. Moving to check." Her Pashto was flawless, her tone urgent but controlled. Outside, the Taliban voices paused, then erupted in a flurry of shouts. Boots crunched away from the cave, toward the east. Eli didn't wait. He slipped through the cave's mouth, belly crawling into the gully's shallow trough. The ground was sharp with rocks, slicing his palms, but he moved fast, the acrid dust stinging his throat. The truck was 30 yards away, parked on a rocky outcrop. 2 fighters lingered nearby, scanning the hills, their rifles slung low. Eli's heart pounded, but his hands were steady as he reached the vehicle's undercarriage. The fuel line was right where he'd expected, caked in grime but accessible. He loosened a clamp with his wrench, letting diesel drip onto the dirt, just enough to choke the engine without draining the tank. His fingers worked fast, muscle memory from decades of repairs guiding him. The fighters' voices grew louder, and he froze, his breath catching as one glanced his way. The man turned back, distracted by another radio call, Noor's work, holding steady. Eli's mind flicked to a winter night in '83, fixing a neighbor's combine under floodlights, his hands numb but sure. He'd saved their harvest, earned their trust. This was no different, just higher stakes. He tightened the clamp just enough to let the truck start later, then crawled back to the gully, his pulse hammering. A close call, too close. Back in the cave, the group's tension was a living thing. Delgado's eyes were locked on the entrance, his rifle ready. Tate whispered, "He's back," as Eli slipped inside, dust coating his face. Noor's hands shook, but she gave a tight nod. "They're searching the east ridge. Won't be long before they're back." Malik's breathing was weaker, his face ashen. Tate's voice was urgent. "We need to move him now, or we lose him." Eli wiped sweat from his brow, the cave's damp air clinging to his skin. "Truck's set to stall in a few minutes. When it does, they'll be scrambling. That's our window to get Malik out and take the truck." He outlined the route, a hidden gully to a dry riverbed, then west to the outpost. The terrain was treacherous, but Eli knew it like the backroads of Ohio. He'd driven worse in blizzards, navigating by feel when maps failed. Delgado's scowl softened, but doubt lingered. "If this goes wrong, we're dead." Eli met his gaze, his voice quiet but ironclad. "It won't. I've fixed worse odds than this." Tate nodded, her trust solidifying, and Noor's eyes held a new respect. Malik, barely conscious, gripped Eli's arm, his voice a rasp. "Don't let me slow you down, Pops." Eli's throat tightened. He thought of his son, now grown, who'd called him Pops with the same mix of jest and trust. "You're not slowing anyone, son. We're all getting out." The cave shook with a distant explosion. Maybe the drone, maybe artillery. The Taliban voices returned, angrier now, as the truck's engine sputtered and died outside. Eli's sabotage had worked. The group's eyes locked on him, their doubt giving way to resolve. They were ready to move, trusting the old mechanic who'd been underestimated too long. The Afghan night was a shroud of dust and shadow, the air thick with the acrid bite of diesel and cordite. Elias Whitaker crouched at the cave's mouth, his heart pounding as the sabotaged Taliban truck sputtered to a halt outside, its engine choking on the fuel line he'd tampered with. Shouts erupted, angry, confused, as the enemy fighters scrambled around the vehicle, their flashlights slicing through the dark. Eli's group huddled behind him, Delgado, rifle ready, Tate, supporting the fading Malik, and Noor, her eyes sharp despite her fear. The cave's damp walls pressed in, the drip of water a faint echo against the chaos outside. Eli's plan was their only shot: steal the truck, navigate the hidden riverbed, and reach the coalition outpost 10 miles west. Time was bleeding out with Malik's wound. Eli's fingers tightened around his wrench, its weight a reminder of his life's work, fixing what others deemed lost. The soldiers had called him Pops, dismissing his age, but now their survival hinged on his hands. The truck's failure had bought them a moment, but the Taliban would soon sweep the cave. Eli whispered, "Now. Move quiet, stay low." Delgado nodded, his earlier scorn replaced by grudging trust. Tate hoisted Malik, her face grim but determined, while Noor clutched her notebook, ready to translate any enemy chatter. They slipped from the cave into the gully, the rocky ground biting Eli's knees. The night was alive with danger. The crunch of enemy boots, the distant hum of a drone, the metallic tang of blood lingering in the air. Eli led, his memory of the outpost's maps guiding them toward the dry riverbed. The truck sat 50 yards away, its hood up, 2 fighters cursing over the engine. Eli's sabotage had worked, but restarting it would be trickier. He needed to reconnect the fuel line without being seen, a gamble built on decades of mechanical instinct. The gully offered sparse cover, its shallow trough barely shielding them from the Taliban's flashlights. Eli motioned for the group to halt behind a boulder, his breath catching as a fighter glanced their way. Noor whispered, "They're calling for a mechanic from their base. We've got minutes." Eli nodded, his mind racing. He'd fixed engines under pressure before, midnight breakdowns in Ohio storms, his family's farm on the line. This was no different, just deadlier. He crawled forward, the wrench cold in his hand, until he reached the truck's undercarriage. The fuel line was still loose, as he'd left it. Working fast, he tightened the clamp, his fingers slick with diesel. A twig snapped nearby, and he froze, heart hammering as a fighter's boots stopped inches from his hiding spot. The man moved on, distracted by a radio call. Eli slid back to the group, wiping grime from his face. "Truck's ready, but we need to move now. Delgado, you drive. Tate, get Malik in. Noor, with me." Delgado's eyes narrowed, But he nodded, his rifle steady. Tate struggled with Malik's weight, his groans muffled but urgent. Eli took his other arm, ignoring the ache in his own shoulders. They crept to the truck, using the fighter's confusion as cover. Delgado slipped into the driver's seat, his movements silent but tense. Eli and Noor climbed into the back with Tate and Malik, the truck's bed reeking of oil and rust. The engine coughed to life, a ragged growl that drew shouts from the Taliban. Delgado floored it, the truck lurching forward as bullets pinged off the chassis. Eli ducked, shielding Noor, his mind on his wife's face when he'd left for Afghanistan, a promise to return. The riverbed was close, its entrance hidden by a curtain of scrub. Delgado swerved toward it, the truck bouncing over rocks, as the enemy's flashlights faded behind. Eli's plan was holding, but the cost was clear. Malik's breathing was a faint rasp, and the outpost was still miles away. The riverbed was a treacherous path, its dry banks studded with boulders and sharp drops. Delgado drove with gritted teeth, the truck's tires grinding against stone. Eli clung to the side, shouting directions over the engine's roar. Left at the forked rock, stay tight to the wall. His maps, studied in quiet moments at the outpost, were his compass now. The Taliban's shouts grew distant, but a new sound cut through, the whine of a motorbike, one of their scouts closing in. Eli's gut twisted. They couldn't outrun it, not with Malik fading and the truck's engine straining. He leaned over to Noor. Can you fake another radio call? Send that bike the wrong way. She nodded, her hands shaking as she mimicked another urgent transmission. Target spotted, North Ridge. Pursue. The bike's whine veered away, buying them precious minutes. Eli's chest swelled with pride for her, but there was no time to dwell. Tate's voice was sharp. Malik's pulse is weak. We need to stop the bleeding or he's gone. Eli tore a strip from his jacket, pressing it to Malik's wound, his hands steady despite the truck's jolts. He thought of his father's World War II scars, earned saving men not so different from Malik. Duty ran deep, then and now. The riverbed narrowed, forcing Delgado to slow. A Taliban truck appeared in the distance, its headlights cutting through the dust. Eli's heart sank, but his mind churned. The riverbed's walls were steep here, a natural choke point. Delgado, stop here, he said, pointing to a pile of loose shale. Help me. Together, they shoved rocks into the path, creating a crude barrier. The enemy truck slowed, its driver cursing as tires spun. Eli's trap wasn't much, but it was enough to stall them. They pushed on, the outpost's faint lights flickering on the horizon. Malik's head lolled, but Tate kept pressure on his wound, her face etched with determination. Noor whispered, no more chatter. They're falling back. Eli exhaled, but the victory felt hollow. His hands, bloodied and diesel-stained, trembled now, the weight of their survival pressing down. He'd lost his wedding ring in the gully, a small but searing sacrifice, his wife's gift, worn through 40 years of marriage. He'd promised her he'd come home, but Malik's life came first. The truck rattled into the outpost's perimeter, coalition soldiers rushing to meet them. Tate shouted for a medic as Malik was carried off, still breathing, barely. Delgado climbed out, his eyes meeting Eli's with something new, respect, hard-earned. Noor gripped Eli's arm, her voice soft. You did it, Mr. Whitaker. He shook his head. We did it. In the outpost's dim light, Eli sat on a crate, the night's chill settling into his bones. The soldiers around him spoke of the old man's plan, their voices carrying a grudging awe. Eli's thoughts drifted to his father, who'd taught him that courage wasn't loud, it was the quiet choice to act. He'd saved 4 lives, turned the enemy's strength against them, and proved his worth. But the cost lingered, the ring, Malik's uncertain fate, the weight of leading when no one believed. As dawn broke, painting the hills gold, a young lieutenant approached, saluting. Your trick with the truck, it's got the brass talking. Might change how we handle ambushes. Eli nodded, his throat tight. He'd lost something precious, but he'd gained a legacy, one that might save others in this endless war. For a mechanic from Ohio, that was enough.